only heads of households could go out, which meant that only guys went out. It was comical because all of a sudden, men who never did grocery shopping in their lives had to. So like there were these images on Facebook or whatever where people were going like, "This is what you call watercress," or "This is ginger. This is the difference between ginger and turmeric." Hi, my name is Zedeck. I live in Port Dickson, Malaysia, and me and my partner Sharon, we work from home. She's an artist, I'm a writer. So we don't really go out very much. We don't go to work. Sharon and I both moved to Port Dickson, which is a rural town, from Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital. We used to go up and down, travel up and down because it's 2 hours away. Because all Sharon's family is in KL, and all our friends are in KL. But because of the movement control order, we've not been able to do that, which arguably worked out for us because we're not particularly social people. Um, so, but there definitely has been a sort of lifestyle change. People basically had to stay at home. They had this really ridiculous thing where only heads of households could go out, which meant that only guys went out, because that's the kind of society we live in, unfortunately. Um, and so apart from the patriarchal sort of thing, there was also this, when it was happening, there was also this, it was comical because all of a sudden, men who never did grocery shopping in their lives had to. So like there were these images on Facebook or whatever where people were going like, "This is what you call watercress," or "This is ginger. This is the difference between ginger and turmeric." The one member of a household rule was sticky for us because I don't drive, so Sharon had to go out and do the shopping. I remember there was once during the movement control order where it was both me and Sharon in the car, and we were sort of strategizing what to do when we got to the police block. We were trying to bank on the misogyny of the police to be able to say that I'm the head of the household, so I should be allowed to go with my wife. Sharon and I are not married, but with my wife, because I cannot drive, but my wife drives. But I'm the head of the household, so I should do the shopping. Uh, they turned us around, unfortunately. We generally don't cook very often, but I think one of the changes in our household is that I had to start cooking a lot. So I know a lot of people are depending more on like food delivery things, services, like so ordering online stuff, because the restaurants were closed, right? So and we didn't want to order in, so Sharon and I both started this thing where we would just alternate days where like she'd cook on Tuesdays and Thursdays and I cook Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. During the MCO proper, restaurants could not have dine-in, no sort of religious services, no sort of, so gyms shut, stadiums shut, all these recreational things shut. Most people wear face masks, and most businesses are obliged to keep a log for contact tracing. There's also a sort of 1 meter sort of distance thing, which mainly affects places like restaurants. The theater's shut, and because so I know that a lot of people in the sort of performing arts community have been very affected. But basically, the country is sort of like shut down. The streets are empty, and there were no funerals happening, no religious and or social gatherings of any kind. But my uncle's funeral happened. Funerals were allowed to happen, but you could only have gatherings of up to 20 people. And I think when my uncle's funeral happened, it was kind of like so restrictions were gradually being lifted. My parents live in Singapore, and because of the border closure, so because they lived in Singapore, I didn't really, we'd only like see each other maybe once every 2 months anyway. They live with my brother and sister-in-law. My uncle, my dad's brother, passed. So I had to represent the immediate family because I was the only one in the country. My siblings live elsewhere in the world. And that was my first trip outside of Port Dickson since the beginning of the lockdown. I remember being very anxious about that trip because I don't drive. So I had to take I had to take a bus and then a connecting bus to my cousin's place. It was full of people. Usually the bus seating's in pairs, so like you're not allowed to sit next to anybody. But other than that, it was kind of like it reminded me of any trip to KL because I usually take the bus anyway. People were like talking and like talking to their phones and like watching videos on their phones. I don't think people seem to be okay. So yeah, there was a lot of travel involved, and then the funeral was at a huge memorial center, also quite a ways out of the city, so there was additional travel. And to get back to town, one of my aunts insisted I go back with a family friend, which I could not say no to. Yeah, I was in contact with lots of people, which made me very anxious. Our lockdown occurred very soon after or during what was essentially a political coup. The government we had before the backdoor coup was the first government we've had that was different from the regime we've had since independence. So in 2018, there was a big election that saw a change in government for the very first time in Malaysia, and that government fell through this coup right before the lockdown. The ruling coalition at the time, or elements in the ruling coalition, engineered a sort of defection to the opposition. And because of that, we suddenly had a new prime minister and a new cabinet. Everything, I remember it quite distinctly because that was the weekend of my birthday, and also right after that we had a full lockdown when all these politicians were meeting and having all these backroom sort of like horse trading. That there were some political aides who actually had COVID-19 and was the center of a cluster. Well, speaking personally, we went into a sort of lockdown, not only having trepidation for like, oh no, like people are dying, but also there is really no hope. I think a lot of people were feeling that way. I think in Malaysia, our politicians have been all our members of parliament basically have been too occupied with the backdoor government. Our health minister got into news overseas for telling people on television that you could beat coronavirus with a glass of hot water. And the sort of director had to immediately sort of come up saying that there is no evidence to support that this is the thing. So that was the kind of leadership that was happening. We've thankfully not had, apart from one or two of these egregious examples, not had people trying to peddle sort of untested sort of vaccines or unusual strategies, or like people generally look towards the civil service for leadership, I guess. Generally, our media has been about has been very good about taking it seriously, sort of getting information out there about like be careful, like here's what you should do. I know like the English dailies, biggest largest English dailies, daily updated page has immediately after the numbers like, here's how to cope with life under lockdown. What do you do for your mental health? Where the media coverage has been not very good is that there's been a upswell of xenophobia, where because we neighbor the Rohingya refugee crisis, there's a lot of xenophobia directed to refugees who are arriving, and also sort of migrant labor in the country. So during the MCO, there was this big roundup of migrant workers and also parts of the refugee community, and they were basically shipped towards like detention centers. And I don't think that the media did enough to sort of hold authorities to account. I think a lot of the national press spun it like, oh, this is our authorities acting to address the spread of the pandemic. Relatively few outlets made the point of pointing out that, one, this is terrible, but also two, you're shipping people to detention centers where they will not be able to practice enough social distancing. You could make an argument that we are generally quite cowed or placid as a polity, but I think whether or not that is the case, I think people are saying that, look, we should take this seriously. And obviously there are some elements of the way this pandemic is being addressed that's quite draconian with regards to the migrant community, for example. But I think generally people are saying like, this is a serious thing. Please stay home. As much as there are people who've been blasé throughout the pandemic, I get like one of our local restaurants scolded me for trying to hand him money. You gotta keep me safe, and you gotta keep yourself safe. So can you please use one of these credit apps? Because we shouldn't be touching each other. I'm kind of squeamish about certain things, like just people getting too close or whatnot. So even at the line trying to enter the supermarket, it's like, can you stop trying to come up to me while we're lining up at the cashiers, because like 1 meter, like, and I'm trying to keep myself away from people, but obviously people have different sort of ideas of what's an acceptable distance. And yeah, like touching surfaces, and both Sharon and I make sure we sanitize ourselves before we get into the car or whatever. It feels like I'm anxious all the time, but there's nothing I can do really, because it's up to the people around me. So it's just a general sort of anxiety that you can't do anything about. So our house is 200 meters from the Heng Yuan refining company. So it's a huge petrochemical sort of plant. There are two in town. So these two like petroleum industries. We neighbor also a school, so it's a secondary school, and our town is under the flight path of the international airport. So although operations have continued at the refinery, so bad smells and noise and whatnot, the school's silent, and the airplanes which would which would sound overhead like about maybe every 15 minutes, every 10, 15 minutes, that stuff stopped. I'm not so affected by it, but my partner Sharon really, like, this was the thing that was the biggest difference, and was the thing that she was dreading the most when the lockdowns lifted, is that the schools would reopen, the planes would start flying overhead again, because it's a sort of jet whistle, like jet turbine whistle as they sort of land. So the silence of, I think that silence sort of typifies waking up in the morning without school announcements, because the assembly ground is right outside our bedroom window. That was a big deal. Compared to most of the friends we know, we've been very fortunate to live on a property with a garden. That was a big part of getting us through this sort of isolation. You get birds coming by, you get monkeys coming by. Because our move away from the city kind of started this thing about living in place. So I think the lockdown/crisis just deepened that sort of path that we were already on. My main worry is that if and when the pandemic is over and like things go back to normal or whatever it is, will we be able to maintain the plot of beans that we have, ladies' fingers or whatever? And so like, will we have enough of that resolve to maintain the sort of closeness or sense of inhabitation that we were forced to embody during this time? We are going through a recovery movement control order right now, which means that the borders are open again. Our numbers dipped to single digits last week, like new cases, and I think people just took that as an indication of like the plague is over, we beat it. So for the last few weeks, the weekends have been jammed because people are flooding the resorts and beaches again, and nobody's really wearing their masks. People forgot social distancing, but the numbers are rising now. So they're reminding people about the social distancing stuff, but they haven't really tightened regulations yet. To sort of boomerang back to the political thing, our former prime minister, who's implicated in a huge, like a massive corruption sort of scandal, had his landmark court date today at the courthouse. Like there was basically a huge rally, which was like thousands of people. People were wearing masks, but their noses were, like how people wear masks wrong. And they were obviously all crowded together. So like the director of the health ministries made a snarky sort of tweet saying that we've been trying to emphasize to people, please practice social distancing. We've done it for months. It's very sad that people are no longer following that. People commenting on social media saying like, oh, great, there's this mega cluster now. When the lockdowns first were starting across the world, like, there were all these like think pieces about the end of capitalism or whatever, but I don't think we live next to a huge petroleum refinery. They've not really changed their operations in any way. So I think while there'll be a huge recession probably, I don't think that there will be a fundamental change quite yet in the way the world, or in particular our society, works. At least with regards to stuff like race and xenophobia, I think it's gone worse. The crisis has made those kinds of divides, which I mean already were dividing Malaysia before the crisis. It's just made it harder, but also the political situation it's just a multiplier effect. I think things are pretty grim. A lot of people of our sort of social bracket are fortunate because people who work in the office or in the corporate sector or whatever, they've got still the same goals. It's just that they're now doing Zoom calls all the time. But I know a lot of people have suffered and are sort of suffering. People are losing their jobs. Many of Malaysia's industries are dependent on sort of migrant labor. So because of the rising xenophobia and the lockdown, people are getting squeezed, and there were like sort of bunch of like citizen initiatives to like get food supplies to people. It's pretty dark for a lot of people, I think, especially in urban areas, I think, because the opportunities to what you can do with where you are is so limited in a sort of urban environment. Throughout the 3-4 months that we've been under this lockdown, I've just been finishing projects that I was meant to finish from last year. I have not yet experienced opportunities drying up or projects getting cancelled yet. I'll probably see some of that as the sort of economic implications of the lockdown sort of continue. Speaking personally, I think both me and my partner are kind of resolved to sort of changing how we live, so staying home more, cooking more, being more local generally, trying to get a garden going, which is really nice because stuff that I used to have to buy at the supermarket or at the market now grows in our front yard, which is nice. And picking it always really feels good. So yeah, just a sense of being more rooted or living in place, I don't know.